So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to what I believe is going to be the first battle replay that releases in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where it's going to fall in the schedule, but if not, it'll be very early on in 2021, so I hope you had a happy new year, and hopefully this one will go a little bit smoother than 2020 went in pretty much every aspect. But yeah, this one actually I was sent relatively recently, to the point where there were a fair few replays I actually received before this, but I'm bumping this one forward because it's got a fairly nice theme. It's on a map we haven't seen in a fair while, which is the war camp, the North Athelian war camp, which is a nice one. So a nice siege. It's also got a nice theme going on with it, very in keeping. There's a heavy Gondorian presence with some elves coming to the aid as well, so a nice theme. It's not overly long either. I've got quite a few other sieges actually which are very substantial, which I'm sort of... You have to really mentally prepare yourself for a really long siege on something like the Grey Havens, for example, which I do have another one of those, which will probably be the replay that comes after this one, to be honest with you. But yeah, when you've been doing this as long as I have at this point, you sort of need to mentally ready yourself for such a long recording session, but with something like this, it's less of a concern. But yes, this map, we've seen it before, of course. An encampment siege like this, there are a few actually maps that are kind of similar to this one. They tend to be fairly open. It is a siege, so the defenders will have the ability to hold their ground, plug up choke points, get skirmishers into a good position, outlast the onslaught that's going to be coming their way. But you can't rely on heavy fortifications. Attacking archers are always a worry on a settlement like this, in a similar vein to Hobbiton, because they can shoot in very easily and get good value with their archers, which in a more traditional siege with sort of a walled settlement is much more difficult for the attackers to do, and they have to rely on brute strength a little bit more. Having said that, when it comes to skirmishing with the enemy, with the survivability of Gondor and the damage of Lothlorien, you would think that in that aspect, at the very least, the defenders should be pretty good. But in a 4v4 siege as well, the defenders, individually at least, their armies are going to be of lower quality because they're going to have a little bit less money to spend. Maybe lower quality is the wrong term to use when you're talking about two elven armies and two Gondorians up against a host of evil. Smaller armies would perhaps be the more operative term. We'll go through the attackers first and foremost. Out here in the trees of North Athelian, they're going to be marching towards this encampment with the intent of razing it to the ground. Starting off with Bob the Rob playing as a Mordor army, again very thematically appropriate given the geographical location we are in. Orc fodder, extremely cheap, not entirely free as they were once upon a time, but they're still so cheap that they may as well be free, to be honest with you. That's, effectively, for the cost of an armour upgrade for other factions, you get a whole other unit of nearly 190 fighting orcs, which they may be trash individually, but with that many of them, their effectiveness certainly adds up, and they can act as a buffer for more important units, as can the Moran on infantry, to be fair. They're a decent line infantry unit for what they are. They're not overly expensive, but you shouldn't really expect them to be able to outpower a lot of other units of this type. When it comes to Mordor, you need to be obviously engaging quite a lot of numbers, a bit of combined arms. Units of individual quality do exist within your roster and you can use them as such, but the Moran on infantry are not one of those. They're very much just your rank and file unit. Something else which the orcs do tend to do quite well, however, are cheap axemen. Sort of very cheap and viable armour piercing for your armies, and orc maulers fill that role for Mordor. Yes, they're very vulnerable to arrows, which is a big problem when you're dealing with Lothlorien and Gondor, because both of them can target down units at will. But if they do get into melee against Gondor especially, they can offer a little bit more of an edge. For example, if you combine them with the Moran on infantry in front, all of a sudden that becomes a more tricky proposition for Gondor to deal with. Lots of numbers, bit of AP, survivable enough with the Moran on infantry. Decent little duo for not a lot of cash, which of course is key when you're playing as the orcs. Orc javelins as well, well known for being a very, very efficient unit, you would call it. They're very cheap, so you don't mind too much if they act as a bit of a sort of a lightning rod, really, for the enemy archers. But if you do get into range with them, they can also do a decent amount of damage with their armour-piercing projectiles. Not a huge amount of base damage on cheap javelins, but they can still get the job done. So it's a real catch-22 for defenders when they have to deal with the orc javelins, because you either let them get that damage off, which is a real problem, or you have to use valuable ammunition on a unit which ultimately isn't that expensive. If you get them into loose formation, they can withstand a little bit more in terms of punishment. Troll drummers, I don't know whether the morale effects have been fixed in Reforged yet. I would assume, based on the fact that the patch is still there haven't been any patches of late. I would assume that it's not, which means the actual effect of the troll drummers is probably fairly limited, but they still look pretty cool. Rhun halberdiers, in terms of what they offer in terms of individual melee strength, you would say they're more useful than the Rhun infantry on this occasion because of the armour-piercing phalanx. Having said that, of course, the lack of a shield does mean that the archer problem exists for them as much as it does for the orc maulers. Some Mordor elites as well. Temple Guard are a fantastic choice because they'll be able to target down any Gondorian unit in particular and delete them from existence, really. You want to be a little bit more careful, I would say, about getting into a tussle with one of the Lothlorien high-tier archers because that becomes a little bit less clear on how effective the Temple Guard can actually be. Some Rhun archers in here as well, just for the basic unit. This kind of unit, a cheaper archer, which is just there as an annoyance, is really useful on a map like this. So we shall see if they get used properly. The Sauron's Will are effectively the big brother to the Orc Maulers. They're much better in melee, but they're also more expensive, so they don't have the really cheap, efficient tag going for them. But they will, of course, perform to a better standard regardless. And against Gondor, they're definitely a good pick. When you're on the attack as well, for forcing your way through lines, the Blackguard of Barad-dûr are a very useful unit indeed. I really like the unit model. Like, they used to look a little bit out of place, I would say, in terms of the quality of the model. But now that is most certainly not the case ever since they were upgraded. They've got that sort of falchion type weapon and then the big great shields that they use to push through the lines with. The Uruk Captains are an armour-piercing bodyguard unit. That's where the general is today as well. Very useful unit. In terms of their stats, they may be relatively basic, but the armour-piercing does lift them above the likes of the Carmel's Chosen, which are very average for what they offer. Then you've got the Minas Morgul Chosen, pretty much the bulwark of the upper-end Mordor infantry, because they are very, very tanky. Not necessarily the most damaging unit in the world. The Spear Malice most certainly applies to them, but they can hold things together very nicely just by the fact they're very difficult to kill. Having said that, Lorien and Gondor do have the armour-piercing necessary to do that. And you have the Olag High, or the Olog High, I should say. Very, very damaging, but trolls, you need a little bit of finesse to use them. They're not quite the tanky powerhouses they are over in Dak. You need to commit them at the right time, otherwise they will evaporate pretty quickly, even the mighty Ologs. His nearest ally, the Easterling, is going to be marching with the armies of their master today, played by Roma Carol. He has got some Scion Rim, which, in much the same way as the Minas Morgul Chosen, actually occupy this spot of being a really tanky upper-end unit, which isn't necessarily the most damaging. Of the two, the Scion Rim do tend to perform the better, which is perhaps what you would expect, but they fill much the same role. Very, very tanky, designed to just sort of stand there and take hits more so than deal damage, but because of how long they stay alive, they do tend to rack up a decent kill count for themselves. Nice armour and shields as well. The two upgrades on the Eastron Clansmen make them a much more dangerous proposition as well. I say dangerous, much more awkward proposition to deal with for the defenders. Definitely a very efficient unit for Rhun. We've got some Eastron crossbows. If they can get into position, they can be very useful, but if the defending archers are doing their job, this is one of the units that you really want to be targeting down. Variag mercenaries, however, will probably not allow them to do that because they're a fantastic archer in the skirmish because they've got that shield value. Not overly expensive, exactly the sort of thing that they are going to be utilised for. Dragon's Wrath crossbows, again, if they can get into position, which should be slightly easier given how tanky the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen are. But if they do get bogged down in melee, then it is a problem. But a really nice unit, an awkward unit for the defenders to potentially have to deal with. Unsurprising to see the Flag Rim, because they're a really good choice whenever you're facing off against a composition that includes Gondorian armies. Gondor really struggle to deal with AP, or they struggle to mitigate the effectiveness of AP, I should say, which will be a problem for the Gamp Rim can give them as well. Balcoth Tribesmen, kind of similar to the Orc Javelins, only you have to pay slightly more for them, and there are less of them, but you know, they will still do mostly the same job. There's more Eastron Clansmen over there as well, and a bit of cavalry. Nice to see the Carmel's Dragon Knights. With a map as open as this, having some knights can be a very useful thing indeed. Then I think, yes, we have another Mordor army, so we'll go through this one slightly quicker. Commanded by Joran, he's got a Troll Catapult, much more quick to move around the Troll Catapult, which makes it nice in a situation like this, just more user-friendly, and of course the Trolls themselves defend themselves far better than a standard Catapult crew can. Moran on Halberds, he's got a lot of Trolls with the Catapult, the Drummers, and the Olags. He's also gone for some Temple Executioners with the Armour Upgrade, a superb unit over a long period of time in melee. The rest of them are all hidden because, rather strangely, this is the part of the map where you tend to get a lot of ability to hide, which is kind of weird. And finally, last but by no means least, we have Khan, played by Pejo, or Pejo. He's got some Nurad halberds, very much the same sort of thing as the Gamp Rim. Khand in general have got that vibe going on for them as well, where they've got sort of an armour-piercing line infantry unit and a halberdier unit, making them really good against armoured front lines, but they do have a few weaknesses and drawbacks in other ways, like base damage. Nomadic infantry, really good unit for skirmishing as well, a little bit more of a cost to them than the Variag bowmen that they're alongside, but overall you basically get what you pay for. If you want to pay slightly less, the Variag bowmen will do the job. If you've got a little bit of extra cash, however, the nomadic infantry are just slightly better at doing that job in melee and at range. Nurad footmen, here they are, nice shield value on them. Overall, I think the Flag Rim have got slightly the better melee stats, but the Nurads have got that really large wicker rectangular shield. Overall, it doesn't really matter though, it's apples and pears really. And then over here, Nurad Stormguard, we've got some nomadic marauders, so all of the high tier stuff, including the Brotherhood of the Spear, Sword and Axe. So a lot of elite units for Khand, including some hidden units back there. Now we move on to the defenders. You can see the Barren lands just in behind this encampment. Interesting that this is where they're choosing to defend from. We've got Proxima Centuri playing as one of the Lothlorien armies. Got some Riders of the Goldenwood over here in the corner, really nice with their Silver Thorns. Could be a bit of a problem for a more infantry focused Khandish force as they try and push towards the camp. We've got some Kindred of Celeborn, we've got some Watchers of the Goldenwood, got some Lorenand Archers, Lorenand Axemen, Swordmasters, Blades of the Wood and Spears of the Wood. There could be a few hidden units as well, because Lothlorien do have a few of them, but this is kind of what you'd expect, because there's a big cost outlay in having 3 bodyguard units essentially. So that is more or less going to be all of it. They may have 1 extra unit of hidden stuff somewhere. Then the other Lothlorien army played by Allfather. He actually sent me this battle replay as well, both he and I think it was Morris, we'll see in a minute, both sent me this one. So we've got Riders of the Golden Wood, he's gone for some March Wardens, which is good to see, Spears of the Wood, Lorenand Warriors for the Armour Piercing Edge, which is a good choice I think, Blades of the Wood and Woodland Protectors, and then there's a few units up on this hill as well, which I would imagine are probably, well, actually no, not a ranged unit, Karas Galadon's Guardians, which is an interesting pick. There are some Kindred of Celeborn back here as well though, so as you would expect, Lothlorien, when you've got a little bit less money to play with, the elves do tend to show up a few weaknesses, but still fantastic units for their tier. Then we have Nabest playing as the first of 2 Gondorian armies. The Gondor archers will be quite comfortable in a skirmish fight. Not a huge amount of cost, decent defensive values. Fountain Guard, we've got mixed in there, I think, yep, some Wardens of the White Tower. We've got some Axemen of Lasarnak with just the first level of armour upgrade. Some Gondor Spearmen. You can see that this is, they've got a little bit less money to play with because they've not got the armour upgrades on several of their units, which is a telltale sign. Athelian Rangers, still the body piercing is a factor. The Gondor Infantry have some armour upgrades, however, perhaps a sign that Nabest intends for them to be the first ones into the breach. Citadel Guard, obviously, with that armour piercing that they bring to the table. Raven Helms with those big Zweihanders. Pelagia Marines. And then over here we also have some Gondorian archers. And then finally, indeed, we do have Morris, who also sent me this one. So we have Mithrandir's retinue. They should be careful about getting into a tangle with the Carmel's Dragon Knights, who not a big cavalry presence on the field today. Just the 2 units of Lothlorien horse archers and the Mithrandir's retinue on the other side, of course. We might have a couple of units of hidden units in the trees as well, which could pop into existence, but Carmel's Dragon Knight's the single most dominant unit off the charge and then getting that initial melee and underway, but you have to say the defenders have invested more in their cavalry from what we can see. Fountain Guard here, Veterans of Osgiliath, Marksman of Caer Andros, a good multi-purpose unit for a situation like this, where your skirmishers are obviously going to have to muck into melee at some stage. Pelagia Marines, armour piercing from the Axemen, high base damage from the Raven Helms, Gondor Spearmen who do have the full plate armour, and the Gondor Infantry have also been blessed with such. We've also got some Nimlothian Honour Guard over here, which is where his general is. So, without further ado, let's begin. It will be interesting to see what pops in for the attackers over here, because that will be a good indicator of what we can expect going forward in this fight. Some of the Khandish units will pop in, but it's mainly Joran's army actually, which I'm most interested in seeing, because obviously this is a very small outlay of his army that we can see here from Mordor, but Mordor not... To be fair, a lot of players do play Mordor as more of a quality-centric faction, which I've lamented in the past. It takes away one of their huge weapons, but we shall see if Joran has decided to do that as well. Variag Warriors popping into existence as well, and Brotherhood of the Bow doing the same, so a little bit more cavalry on display for the attackers, but they'll be outperformed in a horse archer duel against 2 units of Riders of the Golden Wood. Variag Warriors is a good cheap unit of heavy swordsmen as well. They won't get demolished quite so easily as many of the other Candice units will against someone like the Elves. Let's have a little look at what Joran is rolling with as well. A couple of units of fodder. 3 units of fodder, in fact. A lot of fodder. 2 units of javelins. A couple of units of Minas Morgul Chosen. The Nazgul are on display. A couple of units of the Moran on Guard, which are the spear version. Don't see them as much as you do the infantry and the halberds. So interesting. He hasn't gone overly heavy into the quality side of things, which I like. I like the idea that he's tried to spread out and be a little bit more balanced with things, because it can be very tempting as Mordor to invest all of your money into elites, which when you're on the attack, you, as I've said several times before, you tend to do more damage to your team's chances by doing that. Meanwhile, over here, just in behind the stakes, they will have to shoot over these, because this is effectively a wall to them. So I don't know how the angle is going to be for these March Wardens. When you're on the defence like this, your skirmishers can be such an important factor in how the battle is going to play out. So we shall see how well that does. Blades of the Wood. Certainly they lack the armour that the Gondorians have that they're going to be fighting alongside today. However, defensive skill, nice base damage as well. For the tier of unit that they are, individually they will do really well. If you combine them with the the more heavy duty Gondorian tier, as you can see, it looks like the defenders are going to try and do. It's a fairly winning combination, you have to say. The anti-cavalry and just survivable nature of the Gondorians, and then the extra little bit of X-factor that the Elves can produce. I don't know why he was having this unit of horse archers over in the corner. I guess he just forgot about them Proxima Century, because it's not as if they were hidden, so it was obvious where they were going to be. But if he can link up with the other unit of Riders of the Goldenwood, that's a pretty nasty array of cavalry. But siege equipment, a troll catapult, good for firing into the settlement, which is definitely going to be a good tool for the attackers to use. Just in general, their ranged threat from the artillery, and from stuff that has a bit more punch to it as well, like the Easterling crossbowman. They've got enough as well to be skirmishing with the enemy. Moranon archers, Variag mercenaries, nomadic infantry and Variag archers. All of these things are going to be good for just sort of sitting, taking a bit of punishment, giving a little bit back, and then later on you can roll forward with some of your more dangerous things like your javelins and crossbowmen. Less of a problem counter-skirmishing with the catapult, particularly when said catapult is being manned by trolls. Riders of Goldenwood also going to march. I'll be interested to see actually how Lothlorien utilise these 2 units of very high ticket horse archers. Easier said than done to utilise a unit that, to utilise cavalry as the defenders and make it worth your while, because you often have to punch above their weight, and the Riders of Goldenwood already have quite a lot to pay back. How much you have to spend. Coming around this way, however, you have Bob the Rod. It'll be interesting to see if they collapse in on the settlement all at the same time. That's generally the best way to do it. If you wait for Can to come over here and start attacking this way, and Mordor, one of the Mordor armies anyway, to start attacking the Gondorians here, attacking all at the same time is for the best, because eventually they're going to start to struggle on multiple fronts, and that can be where the defenders make mistakes. The timing and the nature of reinforcements that they provide to their struggling front lines can often come under too much strain. However, it does look as though Joran and Roma Karol are interested in moving forward immediately. I mean, this could still pay off. Crossbowmen and archers getting into place. I mean, this is definitely going to be the sort of situation where you can open up on them immediately. I mean, to be fair, I mean, getting right up into the front of these front lines with the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen, you're going to be able to just fire in. You rip through with the body-piercing bolts fairly easily, but Gondor archers opening up, you will get more kills on something like the Easterling crossbowmen more easily. They've got much more glass cannony than the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, but the Dragon's Wrath crossbows are very expensive. You can see several Gondorians getting shot. There are the Dragon's Wrath crossbows firing in, getting lots of damage to the Gondor infantry and to the Gondor archers. Mithrandir's retinue pulling back out after a charge. March Wards of the Wood firing their poison arrows. They won't break the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, however, so it's the poison itself is actually going to have very limited impact. Take quite a few volleys to bring the Dragon's Wrath crossbows down, however, and they could, you know, this could be an interest. We'll be able to tell by the result of this battle whether this proved to be a worthwhile gamble, essentially, by mainly Rhun, but Rhun is moving forward now to sort of back this aggressive stance up. Because they're not going to be able to do a lot of damage here to the really high-ticket units of the defenders. I mean, to be fair, the Athenian Rangers, they really should be targeting the Athenian Rangers here, the attackers. The Athenian Rangers, I think, are going after the Dragon Knights, which, again, is kind of an interesting choice, I would say. Well, no. Are they going after the Gamprim? The Gamprim's a much more understandable choice, I would say, because the Dragon Knights, as long as you can keep them bottled up, they don't actually represent the threat that maybe you would think. Mithrandir's retinue pushing out this way. Over on this side. Riders of the Goldenwood, you can see here how dominant they are in a fight between these two horse archers. Entirely different league. If this were the Chieftain's Vanguard, it might be a different story. I would still back the Riders because of the extra oomph that those Silverthorn arrows give them. But the Chieftain's Vanguard are much more built to be able to go toe-to-toe with at least one unit of Riders of the Goldenwood, two of course, and it becomes, again, very much a fight that is in Lothlorien's favour. More projectiles coming. You can see a lot of damage has been done, but to units that I think Gondor won't mind losing, the black trails of those poison arrows, the Eastron crossbows are also starting to show the strain. The Athenian Rangers have also been pulled back. Fiery boulders being loosed in. I kind of like how aggressive Rhun are being here, but it will only truly pay off if his allies are willing to do the same. Javelins. Kind of a grazing volley here onto the Gondor infantry. But Scion Rim and Eastron Clansmen. I mean, the Scion Rim are a serious unit, but so are the Ravenhelms. A little bit more about that damage. And of course, if they can isolate and destroy elements of this runic army. That was a nice shot, however, right down the line. Not many of those volleys have been that effective so far, and it is only Spears of the Wood, but time will tell whether this proves to be worthwhile. Lorinand warriors going after the Caras Galadon's Guardians. Still, you can see Lorien out wide. The Mithrandir's retinue was out here. There's not really any evidence of damage. Well, I say that, there is actually evidence of a lot of damage done. The Mithrandir's retinue must have got a nice charge into the Morannon infantry. Not the most dangerous unit, but you're definitely thinning the attackers' numbers, which of course are going to be their primary vector for victory here. Javelins from the Pelargir Marines, Eastron Clansmen struggling. The Scion Rim will be much more difficult to break, but the Clansmen, not so much. Ravenhelm's doing a good job. They've got the terrain advantage as well. Gamp Rim coming in, fortifying things with a phalanx. Dragon's Wrath crossbows probably out of ammunition at this point. Sandwiching these Gondor spears, and they will really start to struggle with those heavy scimitars, the curved blades that they have. These Gamp Rim, however, have been a little bit isolated. Rhun have been very much on the front foot so far, but in order for this to be worth their while, like I said, the other players need to be a little bit faster, and I have to say, Khand is being too slow. And Mordor is being too slow. The two flanking armies, and this is kind of what I was worried about. While I can appreciate Rhun and Mordor being this aggressive, if you have a feeling that your flanking armies are going to be too slow, if they're not going to move in quickly enough, it will backfire on you. And that's what I fear here. Mordor, the flanking Mordor army and the Khandish army are being much, much too slow, and I feel as though a big part of that for Khand is the fact that the Riders of the Golden would have got them rattled. They're scared of them. And it's a problem. They can't afford to be turning their entire army around just to deal with two units of very small horse archers, when their allies are already going hammer and tongs on the front line. And that it could be a lesson that, unfortunately, the Khandish player has to learn later on in the battle, when potentially Rhun and the central Mordor army have already taken a ton of losses. Javelins from the Pelargir Marines firing into the Dragon Knights, projectiles back and forth, bolts from the Easterlings, as well as javelins and elven arrows being utilised from this angle as well. Citadel Guard have been added to the front line. The armour piercing is definitely a big difference maker when it comes to a straight up fight between them and the Scion Rim. And also with the backup here of the Ravenhelms, very much a foregone conclusion. Mordor are moving in, showing a little bit more intent than Khand on the other side. Mithrandir's retinue trying to charge forward. Rhune's still trying to make something happen on the front line, but the Lancers didn't actually come down there. They had to get their swords out, but it was still enough to cause these Balchoth tribesmen here, or Balcoth tribesmen I should say, to break. Rhun is still over here. Still got a decent amount of units. His front lines are a little bit more cohesive than the runic ones, but Rhun has had more ground to cover when you're looking at Rhun, and if you see them struggling, Mordor should send over a couple of units just to keep the attack going for as long as possible, and give Khand and Mordor the time they need to get onto this, get into this position and start helping with the attack. Marchwarns of the Wood being committed to the front line, as well as Gondor archers. I mean, fortunately for them, it's only really Moran on guard and Moran on units they're having to deal with on the front line. If it was a unit of quality, they'd be getting a real lesson in terms of what a real melee unit is all about. Mordor have made it to the front line now. They're a little bit stretched, but at least they have made it to the front line before Rhun has disintegrated. So I'll give Bob the Rob some credit there. I don't know how long these front lines are necessarily going to last with Orc fodder. Well, there goes. The aggression has paid off to a certain extent, you'd have to say, with Morris's general being slain by some flag rim. Moran on infantry shoring things up, but the Gondor infantry and spearmen, upgraded as they are, will be able to hold on for the time being. Soldiers of Gondor, whatever comes up that hill, they will stand their ground. And over here, Gamprim. Yeah, I mean, they will eventually get turned back here. They spread themselves a little bit too thin, which you could criticise the runic player for, but I would criticise more. Like, early on, Rhun are going to be taking losses here. The attacking player I would criticise the most, however, would of course be Khand. Like, he's had his whole game plan derailed essentially by a very depleted unit of Riders of Goldenwood, which, if that's happening, that's on you as a player. You don't need to be turning your entire army around to meet one unit of horse archers. Yeah, but it's a lesson that Khand will, if the attackers go on to lose this fight, it will be a lesson that Khand have to learn in the late game, because they will undoubtedly be the player with the healthiest army left come the late game of the attackers. This, however, is more like it from Joran. He's pushing through. Pushing through with his Blackguard. More lightweight and more depleted elves will not be too thrilled about all of that. Woodland Protectors trying to throw their javelins in, but they're not going to be able to throw enough of them in to stop the advance of the Blackguard. I like this from Mordor, causing a little bit of chaos. None of these units on the front line either are going to be that great against something like Olag High, so they'll be able to get a lot of kills. The other unit of Riders of the Goldenwood has come over here now, so it's even less understandable why Khand is still so static. Very slow. Very poor, actually. Very poor. Riders of the Goldenwood are still here. Over here. Troll Drummers moving forward. More Orcs arriving on the front line all the time, but Orc Javelins being engaged here by the brave Gondor Riders. There goes the Runic General, getting mixed up with the Fountain Guard, with his cavalry. Again, judgment questionable to charge in here, but I guess he's just trying to keep this attack going, trying to keep up the aggression, but his army is almost spent. And Gondor ultimately will be able to hold on. However, the window that he's given to Joran's Mordor army is probably more significant, to be honest with you. In comes some Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen up against Lorenan warriors. Defensive skill, actually, of the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen is probably going to be a little bit of a problem here for the Elven warriors, trying to utilise those mighty two-handed axes. Already, I think the defenders are starting to show signs of pulling back, which may be a result of Joran pushing through that line and them not really being prepared to deal with that, which that might ultimately end up making Khan's army still viable in the late game. I would really like, if the attackers go on to win this game, I would really hope that the message that the Khan's player takes away from this game isn't, well, clearly I did everything right, because I would be really leery about that. The early game, I think, from Khand was poor. Even though they haven't really done anything yet, they've allowed themselves to be slowed up far too much. Kindred of Caliborn shooting into the flank, destroying those Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen. So their usefulness was very much short-lived. The Gondorians still doing the business. Carmul and his riders introduced to the business end of some Gondorian steel. And Rhun still kind of in fighting shape over here. Bob the Rob trying to keep this attack going with a unit of fodder for a little bit longer. And there are flag rim over here, but you can see the Mordor assault has ultimately fallen apart, and part of that was because of the stretch nature of this assault. At least he made it to the front line, unlike Khand on the other side. But he doesn't have much to show for it. all things considered. Yeah, Mauler's running off because of the Mithrandir's retinue. Morris going to be able to reorganise his lines. The Troll Drummers coming in, trying to take advantage of a slightly underprepared Gondorian line, but they should probably get dealt with. Coming in with some Blackguard. Again, those units back there, the elites. A player perhaps that is, well no, the Temple Guard are forward. I was going to say a player that had perhaps fallen into the trap of just conserving all their elites at the back, wrapping them in cotton wool, mollycoddling them as many players do. But that's not necessarily the case, not with the Temple Guard here on the line. Marks and Carandros taking some volleys from the Morannon archers in the background as well. Orc archers shooting along the line here of Gondorians, but the Gondorians are good obviously at taking punishment such as that. The time has long since passed where Khan should be getting into the front line at this point. They're sending forward some units now, but what I would say about that is it's about bloody time. In comes some Blackguard, along with the Nazgul and the Temple Executioners, doing the business against the Loren-armed warriors. Fountain Guard are moving forward as well to try and shore things up. I think this is beyond a single unit of Fountain Guard at this point. As strong as the Fountain Guard are, Mordor mean business here. There are some Pelagian Marines over here as well. I mean, positionally, of course, the Easterlings are collapsing completely. They do still have a couple of units left over here, I think. Yeah, some Flagrim and Gamprin, but ultimately, even over here, it's not going that well. The Ravenhelms showing their viability, perhaps, in this battle, you could say. And over here, Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Javelins coming in as well. Pelagian Marines. It's been a well-organised defence, this over here. Hasn't been the need for too many intricate plays, but yeah, Bob the Rob again. The two flanking armies, I think, will learn different lessons, but it's lessons that do need to be learned. Bob the Rob, you can't send up waves of attacks that are undercooked. If you send forward waves that are too small, they're going to get swatted away with very little fanfare. Especially against a faction which is as good at holding a line as Gondor are. The problem's only going to be exacerbated, so bigger waves needed, more elites, more well-constructed attack required. For Khand, of course, as we've mentioned several times already, the pace of the attack is far too slow. Far too slow. And I would say that actually is the greater sin of the two, because this is more likely to put a dent in the attackers' hopes of victory overall than what Mordor have done, because Mordor have at the very least made it so the Eastlings have lasted a little bit longer. They've taken a little bit of the heat off of the other Mordor army that was operating more centrally. Khand are in the melee fight now, some Variag warriors, but as much as they're a little bit more well suited for dealing with elves, still struggling a little bit. And the problem is now Joran's Mordor army is going to start to struggle. Orc Javelins getting just ripped asunder by the Kindred of Celeborn. Temple Executioners fighting on the front line. I mean, they're very, very strong, but Gondor able to bottle them up with Citadel Guard, Fountain Guard. Still some two Camel's Dragon Guard, which surprised me. I mean, Rhun are still kicking in this fight, which is perhaps surprising as well. Those little Karambit blades that the Belchoth tribesmen use, they're going to get in here. Pelagian Marines are routing. Those Javelins. I mean, all Javelins are not an overly expensive unit, but they're still getting absolutely dusted by the Kindred of Celeborn. Bob the Rob pushing through this line actually with some Blackguard, so the Eastlings actually still making progress as the Flagrim. I think cohesion is the key here. I would back the defenders from this position to go on to win this battle purely because the attacking cohesion wasn't really there. As much as I can appreciate how aggressive the Easterlings were, ultimately there wasn't a unified idea of how to approach this battle, you would say. Khand wanted to take their time, clearly. Too much time, but still they wanted to take their time. Mordor, as an individual, didn't organise their attacks in the way that you need to. The Eastlings obviously wanted to charge forward. Everyone else on the team was clearly not as ready for that. I mean, Joran did, to his credit, move forward and supported that, but I don't think it was necessarily what he had in mind from the start. And in an open siege like this, skirmishing with the enemy first is what you want to do. The Eastlings did do that, to their credit, but it was with lower ammunition units, and now Khand are pushing up the hill. Are they necessarily the kind of army that will do all that well against elves? I mean, we shall see. Brotherhood of the Shadows getting targeted by the Loren-armed archers. Kindred of Celeborn are up here as well, so this is where we will see if the Lothlorien firing squad is truly the best. Because in terms of the infantry fight, Khand haven't really taken that many losses, so they should have the numbers and the quality to smash through a singular wing of this defence. Factor in the archers, however, and all of a sudden it's a fairly different matter. The very bowmen are getting absolutely dusted, but you need to focus on the infantry, I think, because you can see here immediately that the Elven line is starting to struggle a little bit under the weight that is being brought their way. Norad Halberds pushing forward, Brotherhood of the Spear, Axe and Sword. All a little bit too bunched up here in the middle for my liking. Brotherhood of the Shadows moving forward, Nomadic Marauders getting killed. Here comes some Keren Amroth Rangers, a unit of Elven Rangers. The most terrifying of them all. But they need that, I mean, again, if they can bottle up Khand and shoot them with all of those Elven Skirmishers, that is the way to deal with things. Just look at how many units here are routing. A lot of them are Mordor units because of the fractured nature of their assault as well, from Bob of the Rob. And you can see as well over here, I mean, Joran is still alive and kicking, still trying to make inroads into the settlement and succeeding to a certain extent. I would say this isn't the best engagement that the Elves and Gondor could have taken. They pushed forward a little bit too recklessly, I think. And now units like the Temple Executioners and Sauron's Will be able to take advantage of a unit of Karos Galadon's Guardians which have been pulled out of position, pulled out of formation. Warns of the White Tower coming in, however. Fountain Guard fighting back to back. Minas Morgul Chosen will not outperform Warns of the White Tower, that's for sure. Don't know whether they're going to have the staying power here. Even fight. Loren-armed Swordmasters. Quality versus quantity on the front line, most certainly. I mean, this front line for Khand is, if it were against Gondor, it would be so much more efficient because of the armour piercing and the fact that that is really the way to go against Gondor. Don't get me wrong, the AP is still useful against these Lorien units, but it's less of a kryptonite to them than it is to Gondor. They've got good melee defense values they can fall back on as well. Not numbers, which is something else to take into account. Here some Stormguard have managed to filter through the lines. They are getting into high quality units, but they are going to get thrown back fairly quickly because they've bitten off a little bit more than they can chew here. Going to be dealt with by the Kindred. Woodland Protectors. Going to try and finish them off for good. Watchers of the Goldenwood are here. Yeah, this is a real problem. I mean, this is where Khand start to evaporate if they can't shut down these Keren Amroth Rangers, and they will. They should. I mean, I don't know who wins that fight actually between the two. The Shadows are more of a melee unit, of course, but the Rangers do have those two-handed swords. Bit of support coming in from the Watchers of the Golden Wood. Very depleted archers, still being hounded by the Riders of the Golden Wood, which both directly and indirectly have been a real problem for Khand in this fight. Mental and physical warfare both. Oof. There goes a Lorien general, point blanked by one of the catapults. Let's go and have a look at what's going on over here, because a lot of carnage has happened over here, but to be fair, Bob the Rob pushing forward. Joran's progress through the middle, I think, has led to a little bit of... They're in danger of bottling it here, the defenders, actually, looking at this. I said earlier on their defence was well organised. They've lost that cohesion a little bit, I must say. To allow a Bob the Rob army, which was so easily swatted away early, I think maybe they just lost a little bit of focus here, the defenders, and that could be absolutely fatal for them. Defenders can afford to make mistakes far less than the attackers. Even in a 4v4 siege that is the case because of the quality of units that you're working with. Shape and cohesion, vital for defenders. Lost over here. Worrying times, certainly. Here you can see the Warns of the White Tower from Nabest, including his general, completely surrounded, will ultimately be brought down. Outnumbered. Not outgunned by these units, but outnumbered, as is often the way. There goes the canned general. Can could end up bouncing off this hill position in a fairly substantial way, to be honest with you. Brotherhood of the Spear is starting to struggle. The Elven quality there for all to see. Looking like a chain route's going to happen. If Brotherhood of the Axe are routing, Brotherhood units in general are routing, it's a bad sign. A real bad sign, yeah. The chain route begins. And that is going to be the end. So, I mean, the Elves, Proxima Centauri primarily, is going to have to turn around and mount a defence against a primarily Mordor force, which is now marching through the encampment unexpectedly, I must say. Canned. Some of these units might return from routing, to be fair, but you could try and run them down with the cav, which, when the cav is this depleted, is really the only thing, the most useful thing you're going to do. Unsurprising to see the Brotherhood of the Spear the most durable unit, both in terms of stats and morale. Still fighting on the front line with their 3 flags instead of just the one that Veriags have to make do with. Mithrandir's retinue pulling back over here. There's still some Gondorians that have also pulled back to this hill position. Loren archers firing into very depleted Sauron's will. Fodder pushing forward. How much ammunition does that troll catapult still have left would be my question. Because they can really make the defenders pay for sitting on this hill with it, potentially. Will Mordor... Because it is at this point, I mean, Mordor are going to have a few units from Canned buzzing around. There goes Nabest's general at last, killed by a banner carrier. But it is primarily Lothlorien versus Mordor encounter now. Kindred of Celeborn are going to carve their way through Orc fodder with, let's be honest, not a lot of issues. Remarkable scenes. Olag High hovering around as well. Watchers of the Goldenwood firing those silver thorns. Yeah, going after Temple Executioners. The Watchers do enough damage to the point, and they also make it so that it's difficult to escape. Once you get shot by the Watchers, moving your unit can be a bit of a tricky proposition, because even if the arrows don't kill the unit they hit, they still knock them over. Yeah, and here come the Candish units that have returned from routing. A problem, but more of an annoyance than anything else. I do think, based on the quality of units left, that if the attackers are going to win this, it will be on the back of that catapult they brought. Because the problem is going to be one of quality for the attackers. They've already had to commit a lot of their quality units just to push through the encampment in the way they did. They salvaged the situation over there as a result of that, I believe. Whereas Lorien still have stuff like Kindred, still have Watchers, even just their more rank and file units. I don't know if you could call the Loren Swordmasters rank and file, but even they are of high quality. They're getting hit by the catapult in a fairly ruthless fashion at this point though, but it's the Mordor units that are breaking, as well as some of the more heavily depleted Gondorians abandoning their own encampments. There are some Minas Morgul chosen as well, trudging forwards. Illidan. Yeah, going after Moran Halberd's a good choice. You don't want a phalanx to be... You don't want to be on the wrong end of the phalanx in the late game. Loren archers. Only a grazing hit, really. Quite fortunate, given their positioning. Loren axemen surrounding these Norad halberds. Surely this is the end for Cand at this point, as it looks like they are getting ready to rout. Kerin Amroth Rangers. Norad halberds. Getting flung everywhere. Temple Guard. I mean, I don't know if they still have ammo. If they don't, they're still a problem in melee. So either way, it's worth shooting at them in this fashion. Look how our cowardly foe runs. Orc javelins. Yeah, I think the overall, I mean, there's Uruk captains, 43 of them, bloodied up. They have seen combat, but and again, the armor piercing is useful, but it's not the be-all and end-all if you're facing off against Lorien. You need a certain amount of skill as well, which, to be fair, the temple units will provide. But it's coming down to an outright brawl, which at this point I think favours the quality that the elves are bringing to the table. But they do still need a bit of range support as well, I would say. Numbers still pushing forward. Moran archers are over here, still getting interrupted by these Mithrandir's retinue. There's only 2 of them that remain. Foul sorcery with some floating tents. Rise of the Gorn was well very depleted, the cavalry, but at this point, if they can just prevent these Morannon archers from getting into the back lines, let's go down to half speed for the moment. Yeah, and they do, they rout them. Goes to show, if you send a unit of unsupported lower tier orcs, very depleted units can do the business against them. Minas Morgul Chosen will sit in the middle of this front line and be very, very durable indeed. Is that going to be enough to see them over the line in this fight? Personally, I'm not so sure. Unarmed archers are there as well. Orc archers routing. Troll catapult. I mean, this is going to be it, isn't it? This is going to be the be-all and end-all for the orcs. If they can get some good volleys here, that momentum should be enough to carry them to victory here. If they don't, I'm not sure. Ooh, that was a good hit though. Kindred of Caliborn occupy this spot as well, so that's a lot of damage done to some quality units. Woodland Protectors also copping that right in the face. Allfather's got his Keren Amoth Rangers as well though, which it's another major problem potentially for the orcs if they still have ammo, which I think they do. Otherwise they'd just be thrown forward into the meat grinder, and they do. Orc Javelins are routing. Yeah, and without numbers on the front line here, the orcs are going to struggle. They need that catapult to start doing the business quickly. With the Ranger shooting into the flank, I think that's going to be game, set and match for the defenders. There goes an Elven General. Elves suffer from that kind of morale shock less than certainly than the orcs that they're facing off against. Thorinand Axemen pushing forward after it's a very brutal fight over here between Khand and the elves. And like I said, it wasn't. I would have preferred Khand to come this way. They would have got shot in the side, sure, but they would have facilitated a much cleaner march through the encampment. And as a result, Mordor wouldn't be quite in the battered and bruised state that they are now. And of course, that is making the elves' job just that little bit easier. And also the Troll Catapult getting interrupted by the cavalry. The Trolls will be able to break the backs of those horses, but just preventing those Trolls from firing, I think at this point. Maybe they're out of ammunition, I don't know. They've used up some ammo, but I don't know if they've used up all of it. Troll Catapult moving in. And there we go. Balance of forces is evenly matched. In comes one of the... It's amazing that Rhun still have a presence on the field at this point with how aggressive they were early on, but they still have a Dragon Knight. He's still making a nuisance of himself. But yeah, at this point, it's very clear. The quality of the elves is going to be too much for Mordor and their minions to overcome. Their minions from the east on this occasion. But it was a very bloody fight. And I go back to what I said, cohesion. I'm not going to single out any player for this because I think all of the attackers to a certain extent are guilty of this. I think of all the attacks, I'd say Joran played this probably the best, probably the most in the most savvy manner. But the attackers needed to put on more of a unified front, I think. And whether you like it or not, if one of your brethren essentially on the attack goes forward in the way that Rhun did, you kind of need to follow them to get the most out of your armies. Whether you want to play the game that way or not, if you don't, you open the door for the defenders to dictate the pace of the battle, and more often than not in this battle, that is what they did. They did get forced out of the encampment ultimately due to some questionable committing of resources, but it's not going to be enough here to send it the other way. Close though, very close. Of course, the relative balance of power is much more in the defenders' favour because of the quality of units they have left. They don't have many units left, but the quality of units they have is significant. Watchers of the Goldenwood, a few Fountain Guard in there. There's also still some Kindred of Caliborn, mostly Elven units. But a good battle indeed.
Let it be a salve upon our wound.
And there goes the Mordor general. He tried to run, sliced in twain by an Elven curve blade. And there you have it. Like I said, cohesion I think was the key here, and that if the attackers were to play in this team again, I think what they would need to do is sort of say, listen, we're either going to be hyper aggressive from the start, or we're going to go for more of a slow burn, maybe try and skirmish them first. If you put on a unified front as the attackers, especially on a settlement like this which is more open, it's very difficult for the defenders to win a battle actually. You know, you put the ball firmly in their court and they need to play almost faultlessly really in order to get the result. However, if you start not having that cohesion, it becomes easier for the defenders, and even with a mistake or two like we saw here, they can still end up being being victorious. Interesting to see that there's 3 DFs and then 1 DF. I would imagine they would have all been on the same team, but Morris sneaking his way in there and doing the business. And very well played to the defenders as well, because I think they did a good enough job. They were cohesive enough. Let's see what did the damage for the Gondorian army, shall we? Lothlorien on a guard. We actually didn't really see them. They sort of went unnoticed for the most part, but clearly I would say most of that was probably against the waves of Mordor assaults from Bob the Rob's army, and doing a good amount of damage there. Gondor infantry doing okay on the front line. Ravenhelms actually seem to perform quite well in this battle, which for Swordmaster units, because they don't have the armour piercing, they do tend to be a little bit more difficult to use, especially when the Ravenhelms, as they are actually more expensive than the Axemen. If I were to pick between the two, if I were blind picking and I didn't know who I was facing off against as a Gondorian player, I would go for the Axemen of Lasarnak. You're more likely to get more use out of that AP, and even if the AP isn't all that useful, they're still a damaging unit, and you don't necessarily need to invest in armour upgrades either. But Ravenhelms here proving that they can be a viable pick. Marksman of Andros doing well, veterans also. Gondorian archers do tend to do quite well in melee when you start paying a little bit extra for them. With Randy's retinue as well, the cavalry was well used. And then Nabest's army, 251 on the Athelian Rangers, of course, in a defensive situation in the current version of Reforged as it is, not too surprising to see them do quite well. And a few units breaking 100 as well, including some standard infantry, some Fountain Guard, again not too surprising. Only 28 on the ones of the White Tower though. They got overwhelmed fairly quickly though, so that's not really it's not really indicative of their quality if we're being honest. But yeah, big thank you to Morris and to Allfather for sending me this battle replay, because both of them did. Under normal circumstances it would probably be a little bit of a longer wait, but I'm doing this one fairly quickly actually after getting sent it, because it's a map I haven't done in a while, and because I've got a spare moment in a day, and some of the other replays I would have filled with this spot, either I've done the map recently enough where I want to give it a little bit more time, or like the Grey Havens, it's a very long battle and I couldn't really face it today after a day of sort of work and other bits and pieces. But still, nice to see the Athelian war camp back in action, and nice to see a nice themed battle as well. However, this is presumably going to be around the start of 2021. It could even be the first battle of 2021 that I do. I think it will be, based on the schedule as it has fallen. But yeah, I mean, plans for the new year. There will be a channel update at some point in January, sort of detailing the plans and possibilities. I won't know for sure what's going to be happening really until we get into late February, but I will have a good idea of what's going to be happening once I get into January. I'll at least be able to sort of let people know what's going to be happening with the channel in the long run. But there's probably good news for the channel, to be honest with you, at least in the short term, just based on the academic years and based on sort of employee uptake and that sort of cycle. It's fallen in such a way that, to be honest with you, there's probably going to be a little bit of a gap between when I submit my dissertation for the end of my course and when I actually move on to the next thing. So it's not going to be sort of immediately I'm done and then I go straight into something, I think. So instead of going in February to something like that, it'll probably be a little bit more of a lag. So that will obviously mean that I'll be able to continue on, from the channel's point of view anyway, with business as normal for maybe a month, possibly 2, longer than I thought I was going to. So I can say that here at the very least, but the exact shape of what I'm going to be doing is still up for debate. But even so, regardless of what's going to be happening, it will affect the channel in some way. I won't be having quite the same freedom of time as I have, of course, during lockdown, and even before that, during my course. To be fair, it was a little bit easier because of, you know, my degrees took place in my hometown, so it was a little bit easier for me to handle. That will not be the case moving forward, however. That will certainly not be the case, in fact. Irregardless of that, yeah, I mean, I don't really have any other information I can give regarding that for the time being. I do still have a steady supply of replays that I'm working my way through. As of the time of recording, I've sort of moved, because the local internet has gone for, you know, there's been taken a bit of a downturn, not to the extent that it would affect me playing like a multiplayer game, and not to the extent that it affects me sort of doing anything on the internet, but it is enough to affect streams, because streaming is pretty much the most demanding thing I can do on my internet, and it's enough to the point where I've had to sort of shelve that for the time being. So more videos are coming out, which means it's more likely, if you send me a replay as of now, that I'll get to it more quickly, because of course it was that I was just doing 2 videos a week. That has increased now temporarily, possibly permanently as well, to 3, sometimes 4, basically the old way I had of doing things. Irregardless of that though, enough waffling at the end of this battle, because this is the sort of thing which can all be handled in a channel update in the new year. Possibly, there'll be a little video just at Christmas as well. Kind of depends, because obviously there's a lot of even with lockdown being what it is, there's still sort of moving around and such that's going on. I'm not in one of the worst, well, actually I'm, relatively speaking, one of the least affected parts of the country, and have been since all of this had started. Regardless, though, enough of my waffling. Big thank you to Morris and all the players that were in this battle replay once again. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope you will join me for whatever is next.